All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final weekend of the Chennai Storytelling Festival. My name is Naveed Moeed. I am a British Pakistani living now in the United States in North Carolina. And I have been a creative writer for many years, for a couple of decades, published, and recently, in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, have expanded my work into improv, but primarily acting as well as playwriting, and then that led very naturally into storytelling. And so I've been part of the storytelling scene here in North Carolina, and enjoying it. I am a lifelong learner, so I feel that I'm on a learning journey. And when it comes to storytelling, and some of the sessions that I've been able to catch up on in this festival have been very informative for me. I feel that one of my greatest strengths lies in the writing side of things. And so, one of the things that talking to a local storyteller who some of you will know, Milbury Birch, talking to her, I realized that, you know, sometimes storytellers have their stories in their bodies, and so much in their bodies, and then they try to put them on paper, and it doesn't feel the same. And so in this workshop, I hope to talk a little bit about how we can do that and how we can make the performance something written that can last beyond us and beyond our moment of storytelling. Because that's the magic of storytelling. It's in the moment. It's, you and me here interacting with each other. So, so the idea of this workshop, and all of you will get a little handout, and I'll give the handout way before the end. I'll probably wait until we're about a third of the way into the workshop, so we have all of our participants, that you can take away and apply some of the techniques that we're going to go through. As we have a fairly small crowd here, normally I say, leave questions and the like until the end. But if you, but as we're not so many of us, I would ask if you could use the raise hand feature, and I will call on people to ask their questions as we walk along, as we walk through this little workshop that we have. So, without further ado, let me just share my screen. Okay, so yes, I forgot to put my name in my own slide deck, so my apologies for that. So we are storytellers. Our tradition is oral, it is performative. We are practitioners of a particular type of art that includes voice, presence, breath, but most importantly, embodied energy. Now, one of the reasons that the embodied energy part for us is so significant, and Zoom is actually an excellent way to kind of illustrate that particular difference, is that when you are in a room with a storyteller, especially if you're in a room with a storyteller with a bunch of children, for example, how engaged and how fascinated, but more importantly, how much in your world your audience is part of that embodied energy, because you and I'm preaching to the choir here. You are gaining as much energy from them as they are gaining from you, and it is working in both directions. It's coming from them and it's coming to you, and that is something that we lose when we're translating that onto the page. However, there's books that I'm sure that you have picked up in your life that have had a really, really profound impact on you. And those books, through their language, it could be Moby Dick, or it could be The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, which is one of my favorite books of all time, where the language totally transports you into the book that you can't actually put the book down. So the first little exercise that I'd like to do, and I like to do these exercises every 5 or 10 minutes, because in a Zoom audience, it's always a little hard for us to kind of keep our interest. So the first little exercise I'd like to do is, in the chat, could you write down one or two books that you have not been able to put down? And then I might call on one of you to talk about that. So in the chat, and I'll kick us off with a couple of examples. Um, one or two books that you've picked up and you've not been able to put down. So let me see. I'm going to put my suggestions in the chat. I mentioned one already. All right, we'll wait for a few more suggestions. Nice suggestion, Shilpa. Thank you. Mm. Could you be more specific, Rachel, maybe? Maybe pick one um, of those two authors. Okay, all right. We have some excellent suggestions. I'll read these out, and then I will maybe even pick on someone. We've got Bhaupadya, Radha, and God of Small Things, which I mentioned before. One of my favorite books. I read it when I was 17. I have read it. I have reread it nearly 17 times since. Gladiator at Law by Frederick Pohl. It's a science fiction novel. 40 Rules of Love. I love that suggestion from Shilpa. When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone. That's an old book, but it's so good. Short stories by O. Henry, Toni Morrison's The Song of Solomon, The Great Indian Novel by Shashi Tharoor, and stories by Manto. Okay, thank you so much for those suggestions. Um, so if I could just pick on one of you, Shilpa, The Great Indian Novel by Shashi Tharoor, could you tell me what made that unput downable for you?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Shilpa here. So, well, wonderful suggestions. Now, this book, Shashi Tharoor's book, it is a satirical book, and the story is of Mahabharat, which is an Indian epic. He has retold it as a modern Indian history. Yeah, and like he has related it to various renowned political personalities. So that I found it very interesting.
Thank you,
That
Shilpa.
was something
So,
new for me. Yeah. I had
yeah.
never, yeah, I have never read something like this actually.
Fantastic. So I want you to think about a little bit about the language that was in the book. What so when we pick up a book, and I speak to a lot of publishers because, I and publishing agents because I'm often trying to get something published, and the the first page is always critical. So if you're not grabbing somebody in the first page or the first few sentences, so what was it about the about Shashi Tharoor's work that really grabbed you in the first page? And if you could describe that in just a couple of sentences.
Yes, as it is, I'm very fond of mythological stories. And when I picked it up, well, of course, his style of writing is very different. And you need to have a dictionary. Now, of course, the phone is there. You always have your phone. So I liked his style of writing and the way he has written the book. That really hooked me to the book.
Thank you. Okay, so that's what we're going for, everyone. So it's the style. So that
Yeah.
very first page that Shilpa read, the style of that page is um, is what grabbed her.
Yes. And I
So
knew that, yes, it is going to be interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So the next little exercise we're going to do is think about now your own stories. In the chat, type one word that describe how your stories feel when you tell them live. And there's a couple of examples of words that you can use to describe those. So for me, I would say that when I tell stories, they are thrilling. All right. Adrenaline rush. I like that. I like that. Okay. So, yeah, thank you for those suggestions. So we have thrilling, alive, enthusiastic, embodied, energetic, adrenaline rush. So these are they're they're really in the moment and dramatic incidents. Yes. So these things are very in the moment when you're telling them live, when you're when you're relating a story, suddenly how something jumps out, and when it jumps out of you, it jumps into the audience, and then their energy comes back into what you're doing as well, and that's part of that's the point where we start when we start writing, because without keying into that emotion. So the first thing is to key into that very emotion that you're feeling when you are doing the storytelling. So I'm going to grab, well, probably not two volunteers because we're a bit short, but I'm going to ask for one volunteer in a second to tell the first minute of your 2 minute story. And what I want everyone to notice is voice, pause, presence, gesture, how the story lives in the room, and what makes it work orally. And then what we're going to do is break that down a little bit and talk about how we take those things from voice and presence and gesture into language. So, could I possibly have a volunteer?
I have a question.
Yes, Eric.
I tend to like to hear and read stories that are told in the past tense. but I
Mm,
find that some storytellers will tell a story in the present tense, as if it's happening right now.
right.
Do you have a preference whether it's performing or writing for past tense or present tense?
I love that question. I really do. So, so this breaks down into something fundamental when you're translating a story from the living into the written, and the the tense in which you are operating. So whether it is present tense or past tense, I always find I did a story at the beginning of the festival that was Caddo's Wall. It's a West African tale, and it's told in the past tense. I have heard that story told in the present tense. And there was another story that I was part of a workshop recently with Laura Sims, where we studied the flowering tree, a very traditional Indian story. And that story I've also heard told in the present tense. And one thing that happens when you tell it in the present tense, it becomes a little bit more alive. What happens in the present tense is if you're telling a story in the past tense, you already know that the narrator knows the story. So you know that someone survived to the end of the story. You know that someone survived and was able to tell the story in the past tense. That's one of the things that the past tense gives us. It kind of tells us, well, something something must have worked out at some point for someone to be able to tell this story. Someone must have survived this. When you're telling the story in the present tense, there isn't any of that safety net. We are always thinking, well, my goodness, what happens next? And what happens next? There is no anticipation of, okay, there must be a definite happy conclusion to this because people that somebody was able to come back and tell us the story at the end. So my preference tends to be for 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 telling stories, for performing stories, to be actually be telling them in the present tense. However, that tends not to work so well for the written word because, as you will know with most things that you pick up and read, they're written in the past tense, unless, of course, they're personal stories. And so, what this relates to is what I call the distance from the personal. So, the more distant you get from using first person narrative, using I to tell the story, and the further away that you get from that, the more likely you are to use past tense. But if you're telling a story that's firmly fixed in the I, so I go to the shop, I open the door, there's this constant sense of anticipation. It's almost as if you're telling a constant living narrative, and it builds anticipation in a completely different way. There's one thing well known to writers in general, which is it is harder to write in in the personal than it is to write in the third person, and therefore you're automatically increasing that distance from the personal. And when you're automatically doing that, you then automatically tend to write in the past tense. So, thank you so much for asking that question, Eric. I don't know if in all of that I managed to answer any of what you asked, but please give me some feedback.
Yes, that's fine. And David, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I put my hand up for two reasons. One was to volunteer to tell a story,
Thank you.
but second was to, comment on what you were just saying, because I think that is partly true. From my experience, I'm a storyteller who sometimes writes rather than a person who started from writing. And I think that the default tends to be with telling oral stories, traditional stories, folk tales, is to tell in the past tense. And I like to experiment, and I like to. There's some stories that I tell in the first person, and I agree with you. It's a very different way of telling a story. And sometimes I tell in the present, and I don't. But I don't think. I think when you talk about the difference in present and past, and the reader or the listener knowing what that someone survived, I think that applies to creative writing for short stories and novels. But I think in oral storytelling, it's more about the sense of the impact that you might have from present. Sometimes it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily change the story so much as the feeling and the vibration in the room. But anyway, can I do the exercise?
Absolutely, please.
And this is the next story I'm going to be telling in a school. And most of the time, I tell stories to teenagers. But on Wednesday, I'm going to be telling stories to young children. So this is where I'm going to go. And it's a 2-minute story. So I'll tell the first minute, and you might need to stop me. All right. I say story, story. You say tell us a story. Story, story. Well, there was a frog. And this frog loved to talk. Can you say it with me? The frog loved to talk. He talked and he talked and he talked and he talked. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Talk, 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 talk. This frog saw birds flying up in the sky. Birds in the sky, said the frog. I want to fly! I want to fly! Everybody, I want to fly! The birds in the sky heard the frog, and they flew down. 2 beautiful birds. Frog, said the birds, we'll help you. We'll help you fly. And one bird took a stick, and the other bird took a stick, and they held that stick in their beaks at either end. And they said, Dear frog, close your mouth over the stick, and we'll carry you into the sky, and you can fly. And I'm going to stop there. And you know versions of this story, of course, the turtle story in India. This is an Angolan variant of the same story.
Thank you so much for David. That was a perfect example of the live storytelling that I.
It's a challenge to do this on Zoom because, of course, this is very much embodied and very physical. I'd never tell this story sitting down normally.
Right. So what I'd like we'll pause on David for a second, but what I'd like the others to do, and if we could maybe hear from maybe Rajesh and Vinod and Rachel and DK, is to tell us what you heard in terms of voice and presence and what made this work for you orally. So just unmute yourselves and shout out your suggestions.
It was dramatic, it was humorous, it rhymed, it was energetic. The movements were wonderful. It drew me in. It was a lot of fun. The repetition worked very well. And so it was participatory, masterful, of course, David.
Thank you, Rachel. Anyone else? Rajesh?
Yeah. I feel when he was trying to involve the kids, and then that conversational thing was really good. and I love the energy and the voice modulations. It was brilliant.
Awesome. And one more person to throw out some suggestions.
Hey, yes.
Hi, Vinod. Hi.
Hey, hello. This is Vinod. Uh, I noticed two things initially. One was his voice. When especially when he said the frog looked up and said, "I want to fly." So was that was that was wonderful. So I could pick up and I dived right into the story. And I think his gestures, especially when the bird said, "Oh, I heard that." So you could actually visualize a frog sitting down there looking up and the birds hearing it, and I think that those two things were very prominent for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Vinod. Visualization. That's and so first of all, thank you so much, David, for just a wonderful little story there. And we've got someone else coming into the room. Um, yeah, thank you, David, for that wonderful little story there, and and everyone else for your comments. Um, so we talked about gesture, we talked about presence, we talked about just how it came alive when David was telling it. And most importantly, Vinod, right at the end, mentioned visualization. So one of my favorite lines from a book. There is possibly one of my favorite authors as well. Vikram Seth wrote "A Suitable Boy," and the very first line of "A Suitable Boy" is goes something along the lines. I'm paraphrasing here, so please forgive me. Where the protagonist's mother comes up to him and says, "We need to find you a suitable girl for you to get married." Now, the reason that that instantly conjures up an image actually also relates to me as the reader, because I, I can immediately relate to when my mother said that to me. And when I have heard various aunties and uncles say that to other people when I read the book in my 20s of that time at my age. So it's the image, it's the visualization that's suddenly created that came across in what David was telling us through his telling rather than just through the words. So oral storytelling, it's about that embodied presence. It's about there was also modulation in what David was saying. Sometimes he slowed down, sometimes he sped up. He used silence in at least one part, where he paused. Gestures, sharing, breathing with the listeners. This is much more difficult when we're doing Zoom storytelling, but when we're in person, sharing the breath with our audience is so important. It was one of the skills which I never had, which I had to learn when I started creative storytelling rather than just creative writing. And the immediate feedback and energy. The audience is together and they're witnessing what you're doing.
Can I ask you to explain more what you mean by the sharing breath?
Yeah,
I know, I mean,
absolutely.
we're obviously breathing the same air, but do you mean actually breathing in time with your audience? I mean, what
It,
exactly?
it, yeah. So, and far be it from me because I'm a younger storyteller compared to many here on this Doom. I'm on this Zoom. Sorry, Doom. This Zoom, and so not to preach to my elders, but one of the things that we do as storytellers when we're in the room is we're we're listening for the audience's reaction subconsciously. A lot of people may not realize this. We're also listening for their breath. So a sort of vivid example of this would be there's the story of the turtle who wants to fly. And in that story, there comes a point when he's telling the story to children, especially, where the turtle suddenly falls from the sky because he's being carried by the birds, if you're at all familiar with the story. And I have heard an audience gasp at that point, go with their breath. Now that's an extreme example, but throughout the process of live storytelling, you are also part of that breathing with the audience. So in that example that I just gave with the gasp, you might, you know, when the audience gasps, you gasp as well. And when you gasp, the audience gasps. Um, but there's other times I've seen storytellers in the room where the story has been very slow and methodical, and I have seen everyone's breathing slow down and they're at one pace. And this leads us into the written part, because, and I hope I answered the question there, David. I'll assume yes. I can't see what's next.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. So this very much leads us into the difference when it's static on the page, because the reader is usually alone and they control the pace. They also control their breathing, which means that you, as a storyteller, sometimes we're a little bit puppet masters on on the stage in front of our audience because we're dictating the pace of the emotion, but the reader controls the pace. So there's no body, no voice, no life presence. Language alone carries everything. The reader must work to feel what the audience felt. So this is, I guess, if all of you are going to walk away with just one thing from this entire workshop, it is just this one statement here. Let me highlight it in red. The reader needs to do the work to feel what the audience felt. The writer has to do their work in trying to make the language as convincing as possible to evoke feeling. But there is a shared burden of work that is a little bit harder because for the reader themselves, because they must work to feel what an audience felt when you're translating a story from oral to written. Okay, all right, let's move on. Oops. Okay, let's see if this works. There we go. So in oral storytelling, your presence creates resonance. In written story, language creates resonance. So in the chat, I'd like everyone to complete the following sentence, okay? And this is about fears, okay? So I had a fear in the opposite direction. My fear was because when I started out storytelling, I wanted to tell some of my written stories as oral stories. And I have a horror story that I will tell after this little exercise. But for now, I'd like everyone to do the following. When I complete this sentence, when I write my stories, I worry that readers will miss ... And we give everyone a couple of seconds to complete that. Oh, wonderful suggestion, Rajesh. Can we have a couple more suggestions, please? Hmm. Feeling my goal, connection. I feel the readers will miss the energy and sensations in the story. I feel the readers will miss my pauses, depth, feeling what I felt. Brilliant. Thank you again, Vinod. That's that last one. They'll miss feeling what I felt. So, this brings me on to a critical thing here, and it's about. Oh, we have another one. I worry that the stories are not worthwhile. I'd love to dive into that in a moment, Rachel. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I worry that the audience, the readers, will miss my timings. So I want to come back to what Vinod said, feeling what I felt. So, part of what I do, and I mentioned this for those who missed it right at the beginning, is I'm also involved in the theatre scene. I'm also an actor and a playwright and a director. And here in North Carolina, I work in the community theatre scene, which is very vibrant and very mixed in with the professional theatre scene here in North Carolina as well. And as a playwright, when I complete a piece of work, one of the hardest things to do is to actually let it go. In fact, I had a very comic moment where I was workshopping a play. I had completed it. We were we'd done the first reading, and I had made lots and lots of notes in the script in front of me. And you know, I'd I'd written up those notes very neatly so that the director could read them. And then the director, as is natural, came up to me and he said, "Okay, Naveed, can I have can I have your notes? Can I have your copy of the script?" Vinod, can you hear me again? Or okay, can everyone else hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes, loud and
Okay, great.
clear.
All right, great, great. Okay, fantastic. So I'm in this. Um, I'm in this little uh, play play reading of my script. I've written a bunch of notes. The director wants to see those notes, and I had this very comic moment where um, I I lifted up the script, I handed it to him. He grabbed it at the other end, and he tries to pull it out of my hand, and I'm pulling it back because I wasn't ready to let go of the script. And this is key. This is something that writers have to do all the time. They have to let go of their work so that someone else can start working with it. And all these fears that we've mentioned, um, especially this key one of feeling what I felt, that I will be scared that when I write my stories, I worry that the readers will miss feeling what I felt. Is that's a critical thing that we have to overcome. We cannot control it. We have to give it up. We have to, and one thing that storytellers will do to overcompensate is they will do a thing I call over language. So it sounds like a really weird. I invented it, so I'm putting it in the chat. To over language something is to put in so many descriptors, so many different things that they almost become overwhelming because you're scared that the reader, as opposed to an audience in front of you, will miss what you're trying to lay down.
Can I add something?
Absolutely, Eric.
Yeah, I like to have the hope that the written words that the characters speak and the written description of actions generate emotion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is especially true in playwriting and screenwriting. However, anyone who has had a play that's eventually been produced, one of the most shocking things, it happens 100% of the time. In fact, Chekhov wrote about this. is the complete surprise when you see the end product on the stage compared to what was in your head when you wrote it. And that's even more prevalent when you're writing prose. So if you've got a story and you have the whole story in your head, how the reader then interprets that story is completely different. So this is a concept I want to revisit. And David left a comment in the chat, which is very interesting, and we'll come back to that as well. Okay. So the good news, each worry you name can be addressed through craft. So if you're missing, if you feel that timing is missing, sentence rhythm, white space, punctuation, warmth can be conveyed through sensory language, specificity and dialogue, and connection through detail, voice, and above all, honesty in language. So, what do we mean by honesty in language? It's 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 exactly what it says it is. If you're conveying an emotion, if it's not true in your heart, it won't be true on the page. And especially when you're building a character. So if you have a character in your story and you're building them up, and they do something that is not emotionally honest for the character in the story, and you try to write that down, then it becomes dishonest in language as well. So let me just. All right, so now we're going to move on to our first exercise, okay? And this will take about 10 minutes. Everyone's going to do this. I'm going to do it as well, okay? So part of being in this workshop was we hope that everyone would have a 2-minute story. Even if you don't have a 2-minute story, maybe find one that you've known that is well known to you. So I'd like to take about, and it doesn't have to be 200 words. That's also very limiting. So David, I'll come back to that. So for the next, oh yeah, and we're also running short on time. I would say write for 7 minutes. Don't try and reach 200 words, but write as much as you can of of your story, but pay attention to these things. What words are you using to do what your voice and body usually do? What sensory details help the reader feel the moment? And how can sentence length and rhythm echo the way that you tell it? So I'll start a 7-minute timer now, and let's all do this exercise. All right, and just I'll leave this on the screen, and I'll put the timer on my phone. We'll hear a little thing when it goes off.
Perhaps if people want to turn off their cameras while they're writing.
Yeah.
I must say, as I'm listening to you, Naveed, I realize that when I write, I sort of read it back to myself silently and listen to it.
That's good. That's because you are always the first reader of your writing. So you are the first audience. It's very similar to when we're practicing storytelling, recording ourselves and listening to ourselves back. One of my most beloved writers, um, Philip K. Dick, very well-known science fiction author, would read his stories out loud to himself.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes in the exercise. Okay, we have about 1 minute left. So start wrapping up. Okay. All right. So, does anyone want to share what they've written? Okay. I see. Oh, Rachel, go ahead.
But first, I need to ask your permission because
Yes.
I didn't really write. What I did was I found a story that I had written that I wrote as a story first and then started to tell it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not presented it very often. And I wanted to know if would that be okay to read here?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Just keep it brief.
sure. Yeah.
So yeah. But please go ahead.
Okay. Bubby's feet hurt. Oi, she moans to her grandson Joshua. Oy vey, she groans to her granddaughter Shira. My feet are bumpy and lumpy like clumps of clay. I wish I had new ones. Quicker than you could say, abracadabra, hocus pocus dominocus, my gut in Himmel, Bubby's feet tingle. When she looks down, her feet are gone. In their place are bright yellow duck's feet. Ay, Bubby moans. Ay vey, she groans. What am I going to do with duck's feet? Let's go swimming, Shira says. We'll race you to the lake, Joshua says. That's not fair, Bubby says as she waddles behind them. In the water, Bubby says, now I'll race you. Her bright
Okay,
yellow duck's feet paddle the water quickly.
we'll stop.
Hey,
We'll stop you there, Rachel. Thank
yes.
you.
And it continues in that vein where all
Okay.
of the parts of her body change.
All right. In the chat, because I want to get to Rajesh, but in the chat, tell me what you so that was Rachel's written work. Tell me what you felt about the difference between the how the timing was, if it was maybe a spoken piece of work as opposed to the written piece of work. What differences do you think you noticed? So, if you could just write a few words about that in the chat. I want to move to Rajesh. Rajesh, I thought you had your hand up, but I don't see it up anymore. Oh yeah, there it is. Please
Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
I wanted to read what I wrote. So,
Yeah, please do, please do,
yeah,
please do.
okay. It's the story of Bitti, who went to visit her grandmother in the village of Nandgaon. Nandgaon is surrounded by hills and a river called Wangana, which flows nearby. This time, Bitti decided that she would try to go on her own to see the river and those hills. Mukesh Maharaj, he was in the village busy with his big puja, and his voice could be heard over the loudspeaker. When Bitti asked her grandmother about the voice, Grandma reminded her about the demon who lived in the mountains. Bitti suddenly remembered the story she heard every year from the grandma. The very story that had always stopped her going stopped her from going to hills. So that was the beginning
Okay,
of my
perfect.
story.
Thank you. So, Rajesh, I'm going to ask you to kind of lead us in the
Hello,
analysis a little bit. Can you hear
hello,
me? Can you
hello,
hear me,
hello.
Rajesh?
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Hello,
Um,
hello.
yes, Rajesh, you are audible, but can you hear us? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think Rajesh got frozen, and I think now he's outside. He'll probably try to come back in.
Okay, all right. David, you have a comment.
I'm just volunteering to be the next person.
Okay, if you go ahead. All right.
Yeah, shall I? So I did the same story that I told earlier, but what happened
Great.
when I tried writing it down is I kind of was taken back to children's rhyming stories. So this is what I came up with. Frog sat by the pond talking. Nobody listened. But Frog talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. Frog's voice was high and sometimes low, sometimes fast and sometimes slow, until Frog looked up at the birds in the sky and shouted out, "I want to fly!" Frog got ready and jumped up high. "I want to
I'm gonna
fly! I
pause.
want to fly!"
I'm gonna
Now,
pause you right there.
children. Oh, can I just finish this? Just 1 second.
Sure.
Now, children, you know, and so do I, that with no wings frogs can't fly. Frog plopped back down and began to cry. "I want to fly. I want to fly."
Okay. What I was going to ask you to do was actually read that without any inflection,
I can't
and
do that.
and and see what you noticed. But I'm going to ask you anyway. What did you notice between your told version and the version that you just read for us?
Okay, so there's far, far much more detail in my written version because I
Hmm.
show it with my body when I'm doing the story. So when I'm telling a story, it's very stripped down the language I use because I'm physicalizing so much. So all of this jumping and looking up, I don't need to say it when I'm telling the story because I'm doing it.
Okay. Thank you, David. Rachel, you've got your hand up.
Yes. When the second piece that David just read summarized what Frog felt until he said, "I want to fly." But even the summary was dramatic and rhyming, and it was engrossing.
Mm. That is particularly interesting. So David leaned into the rhyme because that's something that a reader can pick up on regardless of how a storyteller tells it, whether it's written or whether it is or whether it is told. Rajesh, I see you back in the room. Could
And
Yeah.
and
So
the
sorry, I do not know whether how much I could read.
Oh, sorry.
I was out.
Rachel, we'll come back to you. Can we
okay,
just grab Rajesh while he's
sure.
still with us? So, Rajesh, what was the difference that you felt between the the told version of the story, the oral version, and the written version?
Uh, I feel when I tell stories, I have like I use a lot of body movement, and here actually am feeling restricted, and I'm trying to put that, but I'm not a writer, so I'm struggling to get that energy into my writing piece.
Thank you,
Uh,
Rajesh.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Did you have something else?
No, I do
Okay.
not know whether you heard my piece or not, but
Yes, yes, we did. We all did. Thank
yeah,
you.
okay.
All right. Rachel, let's go back to you. You had something else.
Yes. David started out with the frog talked and talked and talked and talked, and that was very dramatic. The repetition, kids could relate to that. The they talk like that and they could recognize someone talking and nobody listened. And that's something kids can relate to. And on the page, that talked and talked and talked conveyed um, in its own way what the performance of the frog repeating things, the actual words that the frog would say. So it was a summary, but it still conveyed what was going on without my knowing exactly at that point what the frog was saying.
Okay, fantastic, Rachel. So the few things that we're taking away from this is that it is absolutely possible to go from the oral to the written, but they become different things. More detail is added, as David said. How you use punctuation and spacing and rhythm is different. Rajesh pointed out how he felt constrained because he's not using his gestures, his body language anymore, and how he's having to funnel those into a piece of writing. So those are all critical little elements that we have to consider. And so they're open questions that need to be in your mind. There are no actual answers to these, but what I'm asking you to do as storytellers who are going from storytelling to written is to keep these questions open in your mind at all times. How am I feeling constrained because I can't use gesture? How do I make this into words? How can I add a piece of detail in language that can convey the feeling that I'm trying to put across? Okay, so we won't do the breakout rooms because we're actually running quite short of time, and but I'm going to come back to this discussion question, particularly the part about what is the one thing you'd change based on what we've discussed in the last hour, where between something that you've written, sorry, something that you've not written, something you performed, pardon me, something that you've performed and something that and taking that performance into the written. What is the one thing that you would change? We'll come back to that question in a moment, but I want to get some skills into us first. Okay, so let's talk about some techniques. So the first technique I want to talk about is sensory language. Okay, showing emotion through the body, and this is coming back to what Rajesh was just talking about before. Instead of "I was nervous," you see, when I do that, when I'm in the room with you, I was nervous. I'm using my body, I'm using my hands, I'm conveying my nerves. I was nervous to give this workshop. I was nervous about people's reactions. I was worried about what Eric would think when I was 10 minutes late. I was, all these things. I'm conveying that just through my voice and my body. However, when you're using sensory language, it's a different feeling. It's My mouth went dry, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, heat climbed up my neck. Now, you see, I'm using very little inflection. I'm not using my hands. My mouth went dry, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Heat heat climbed up my neck. You should already be feeling some emotions related to that because you will remember when your mouth was once dry, when your hands once wouldn't stop shaking, when heat was climbing up the back of your neck. And so, even without any inflection, without any gestures, without body language, I'm already conveying that. So, sensory language is one of the primary gifts that you will use. Rhythm. So, I waited and waited, and finally they came. I waited and waited, and finally they came. I'm storytelling. I'm using my hands again. I'm conveying just my sense of, you know, just tiredness in that sentence. You're getting all that emotion in my telling. And then when you're writing it, you're using punctuation. You're using and punctuation is definitely your friend here. I waited and waited and waited. Then finally they came. So, as the written statement, everything that I conveyed to you when I said, I waited and finally they came, I have now put that into words. And if you noticed, I've used extra repetition here. So let me pull up my little annotations that I love to use. All right, I waited and waited and waited. So instead of saying that twice, I'm saying it 3 times now. I waited and waited and waited. And that, because we're not used to seeing something like that in writing, it makes us pause and think about what the author is trying to tell us, rather than trying to imagine the author in our heads. So that is technique number 2 that I'd like you folks to walk away with. And then as soon as we're done with these techniques, because we've got enough people in the room, I'll share the handout. Sunlight, okay. Concrete details, not generalizations. Specificity, detail. I love doing this. And this was one of the things where I really failed when I was going from being a written storyteller to an oral storyteller, because I would have such detail in my written work. And then it was, in fact, Milbury Birch who told me, you don't need all those details. Why don't you just say, it was a nice day, and throw your arms in the air? And that conveys to your audience what they need to know, because they will create that nice day in their head just through your gesture. And but in the written word, and this is very typical of what I write, sunlight caught the spider web between the fence posts, turning each strand into silver. Be specific, be flowery. And I'm a great fan of editing, so I'm always telling my students, write more and then kill your darlings. Okay, just delete and cross out. And the 3 things that we've learned so far, let me just see if I can go back to these. Right, so sensory language, my mouth went dry, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Sentence rhythm, I waited and waited and waited. Specificity, detail, sunlight caught in the spider web between the fence posts. And then finally, and this comes back to number 2 as well, which is white space and punctuation. She looked at me, hesitated, then spoke. When we're telling it, could be, she looked at me, hesitated, then spoke. I'm doing all those things in real time. Over here, I'm just, again, using punctuation and spacing. She looked at me, hesitated, then spoke. And it hasn't come out well on my slide, but what I'd actually do is say, she looked at me, and then on the next line, instead of having it in the same paragraph, she looked at me, new line, hesitated, then spoke. Pause in the head, because they're moving from one line to the next. So that also as well. So sensory language, sentence rhythm, specificity, and white space. And let me just have a quick look at the time. Okay, yeah. So I want to take in any questions at this point. We've got a couple more slides to go, and see if anyone's got any questions about these tools for written presence. Okay, David, straight up.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I really appreciate all of these points. And I would contest the specificity point with oldest children and adults to some extent, because I think the spider web glistening can convey an awful lot, maybe more than it was a nice day. But it's, for me, it's just about not giving too many details. Just one specific detail can convey so much, and maybe
Sure.
I would argue, just less rather than generalizing too
Absolutely.
much.
And it comes back to what I was saying about editing. So as I said, I tell all of the students that I teach English, write more and then edit. Okay. So fill up that flowery detail, fill up
Yes,
those things, and then come
absolutely.
back to it, and
Absolutely. When it
then
comes to and then when it comes to telling, edit even further. Yeah.
right, and then telling, edit even further. Okay, Vasanti.
Yeah, I would probably encourage the team to come up with a number of adjectives for descriptors and, for various feelings, and then maybe start writing. Am I right?
That's really good. I'm actually going to get into that in a second. So thank you um for leading us into that, Vasanti. Um, okay, Rajesh asked a question. Who was the person who asked you not to write every single detail? Melanie. I think I missed Melanie's comment. But
Did you say Melanie Burge or Berger?
oh, Milbury
Melanie.
Birch. Yeah.
Huh?
Yes. So so Milbury, when I was translating a written story into a performance, asked me to release some of the very specific details, much like what David just said, which is I had written. So in this one part of a story, it was a science fiction story, and I was trying to make it into an oral performance. I had written a whole paragraph describing a courtroom in space, complete with a jury that was made up of robots and a judge who was an alien, and I went into so much detail and specifics. And then Milbury showed me how to just release some of those things and make it less specific and more performative in order to go in the other direction from the written to the oral. Does that make sense, Rajesh? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, yes, yes. Thank you. I
All
just
right.
wanted the name. I couldn't. Is it Millery?
Um,
Millery
uh,
Burge?
I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, Milbury Birch is a local storyteller here in North Carolina. She's actually a very, very well known storyteller nationally here in the US, and has a legacy of teaching in the storytelling world. Um, she's an absolutely wonderful person. Okay, so rapid. Okay, so I'd like everyone to do this, and we're going to take 3 minutes for this exercise. Find one sentence in your story that feels weak or flat, and rewrite it using one of those four techniques. And I'll put the techniques back. And then in the chase, in sorry, in the sorry, in the chat, paste the original sentence and then the revised sentence. And I will give everyone 3 minutes to do this, and it's an optional exercise. You know, I'm not going to so everyone can start now. Okay, we have about 30 seconds left. Oh, all right, I'm going to post my example of this in the chat. Okay, so I've got the oral version at the top, and I've got the written version at the bottom. And then I'd like, anyone who's willing, please submit what you've got in the same format, and then we'll have a look at some of the results. There we go. Okay. All right. So paste the original sentence, and then the written one. And oh, sorry, I meant to put the techniques back up on the screen. So that's my bad. So sensory language, sentence rhythm, and specificity. So I'll go through my example first. So my oral way of telling this particular sentence would be: the mind reading aliens had terrifying eyes, each of them looking like a series of six-sided mirrors smashed together. And then my written version, I gave the aliens a name, the Jasabians. The Jasabians' telepathic abilities weren't linked to their terrifying eyes, but it was unnerving to stare down dozens of black hexagonal mirrors faceted in orange-rimmed hemispheres. So I've added a lot of detail, but you see, there's nothing wrong with what I said in the oral. The enthusiasm, the whole body and embodiedness with which I said it. The mind-reading aliens had terrifying eyes, each of them looking like a series of six-sided mirrors smashed together. With emphasis on the word "smashed," so that it emphasizes the uncomfortableness. And then the written version is just different. So both of them are valid in their own respects. So does anyone else have an offering to put down? I'll give people a minute, and if not, then we'll just move on. Okay, Umayel. Oh, and Basanti. Let's go with Umayel first. She wouldn't cry. She was brave. Written. Oh, this is beautiful. Thank you, Umayel. When tears pooled in her eyes, she wouldn't let them out, but she gazed directly into the people in front of her, standing upright. That that specificity, that sensory language, and also you've got a very good sense of sentence rhythm there. When tears pooled in her eyes, that actually follows what we call iambic pentameter, which is something Shakespeare used, which is a rhythm in the sentence. When tears pooled in her eyes, what it does as a reader when you're reading that, which is why Shakespeare can be very easily read by a reader, is it creates a rhythm in the mind that kind of continues to reflect. Okay, let's do maybe just one other of these. Vasanti wrote, it was a touch that made me feel a mess in my stomach. My heart circled into a very tight knot, causing a lot of pain. I opened my mouth to scream loudly in a shrieking tone. No voice. It wasn't a tech problem. And then a touch that squeezed my heart, hurt my stomach, and choked my voice. I love that. So I'm guessing that the oral version is the shorter one. Vasanthi, if I'm right. Um, uh, okay, yeah. And then if you see what Vasanthi has done, again, it's a perfect example of the exercise. It was a touch that made me feel messy in my stomach. Again, it's in pentameter, a touch that made me feel messy. In my stomach, my heart circled into a very tight knot. All of these descriptors and all of this spacing, they're actually adding things, which really illustrates what we've learned in the last hour and a half about how we're taking that that oral presence, that embodied presence, and making it into embodied language. All right, I'm going to kind of barrel on into the end. Okay, so the guiding question: will a stranger reading this alone feel what my audience feels when I'm in a room? It's very simplistic, but it comes back to something I said right at the beginning, that what you're trying to do is have the audience feel what you're hoping they might feel, but knowing that, like a play, which is a collaborative piece of work, which a playwright hands to a director and a cast and a crew, and they will put it on and reinterpret it. The reader is going to reinterpret what you have written. When you're a performer, an oral storyteller, there's very little room for reinterpretation, even though there is in the audience's mind. But they are breathing with you in the room. So there's much more synergy. You're living the story together as you're telling it. And when you have the written version, you can't do that in the same moment, but you can still have the reader live your story. Okay, so remember, you already have the gift. You have the emotional truth. This has been a wonderful version of this workshop. I did a little pre-version a few days ago with friends, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to fail. But you guys have been such an incredible gift to me. I thank you, thank you, thank you so much for all that you have provided me personally and each other in the stories that you have shared and in the changes you have shared between your oral and your written. You have emotional truth, you have instinct, and writing is translating, not starting over. So I'm just that's the last thing I'm going to highlight, and then I think we're done. That writing is a translation, it is not starting over. Use the tools and trust your voice. I will now put links for both the PowerPoint and the handout in the oof. I'm going all over the
Why
place
don't you
already.
put your email ID there also?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. I'll do all the things, and I'll take questions in the meantime while we're doing that.
And if you might please come out of screen share.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Oh, wow. We've got quite a few people in the end.
That's an amazing workshop, Naveed. I absolutely learned so much from this. It's just what I need. Just what I need.
That's a gift, David. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vinod.
I came in very late, but enjoyed all the moments that I was able to be here. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, Naveed, thank you very much. It was really useful. I mean, the you many times actually I perform stories. I'm a theater artist and go and whatever I write or read, it doesn't come out the way written material. It changes a lot. Now I could see why it happens. So you have actually made this, the difference is very clear. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Naveed. It's been a wonderful workshop.
Okay.
Thank you for getting up before the sun. there where you are.
You're very welcome. I'm going to stay on and just put those resources, my email address, and the two documents in the chat for people to take, and then maybe Eric, you can cut and paste those details and send those out later with the debrief from if you do that at all.
Well, I suggest everyone who's interested go into the chat room and just copy it from there.
Okay.